Maplewood was the picture of suburban perfection. Nestled in a valley of ancient oak trees and manicured lawns, it was a town where children played safely in cul-de-sacs until the streetlights flickered on, and where the biggest scandal in a decade had been the Hendersons' controversial decision to paint their historic Victorian a modern charcoal gray. It was a community built on predictability, on the quiet assurance that everyone knew their place and their neighbor's business in equal measure. This was the world that Vikram and Nandini Thakur had carefully woven themselves into. Vikram's architecture firm, with its sleek designs for downtown commercial spaces, was featured in local magazines. Nandini's pediatric clinic was the most trusted in the county, her calm demeanor a balm to anxious parents. And their daughter, Aisha, was their masterpiece. Photographs in their spacious, minimalist home on Willow Lane chronicled a flawless life. Aisha, beaming in a sequin lehenga at a vibrant Diwali celebration, the family, clad in matching sweaters, building a snowman in their pristine front yard. Aisha accepting a science fair trophy, her parents' hands resting proudly on her shoulders. Their social media feeds were a curated gallery of success, each like and comment a brick in the wall of their impeccable reputation. Friends and neighbors spoke of them with a mix of admiration and slight envy. Vikram was the devoted father, never missing a school play, always ready with a patient explanation about the physics behind a building structure. Nandini was the compassionate, tireless mother, juggling a demanding career while still managing to have a homemade meal on the table. And Aisha was the golden child, polite, academically gifted, and seemingly content within the gentle confines of their expectations. She played the violin well enough for the county youth orchestra, volunteered at the library, and never caused a ripple. From the outside, the Thakur household was a sealed vessel of harmony, sailing smoothly on a calm sea of achievement and mutual respect. The truth, however, was a different architecture altogether. Within the stark, beautiful walls Vikram had designed, a quiet chill had taken root. The home operated with the efficient silence of a museum after hours. Conversations were often logistical, schedules, appointments, grades, exchanges of information rather than emotion. Vikram's love was expressed through expectation and critique. AB+ was a puzzle to be solved, a missed note in a violin recital a flaw to be drilled out of existence. His vision for Aisha was a blueprint, and he was the exacting foreman of her life. Nandini, drained by the emotional labor of her patients, had little left to give at home. Her love was practical, expressed in packed lunches and timely doctor's appointments, but the warm, messy comfort a child might crave had been quietly boxed away with her medical textbooks. Aisha existed in the spacious silence between them. She performed her role perfectly, the dutiful daughter in a beautiful cage. She smiled for the photos, achieved the grades, and played the songs. But in the empty spaces, she felt like a ghost in her own home, a prop in the continuing production of The Perfect Thakur Family. Her loneliness was not the dramatic kind of a teenager locked in her room, but a deeper, more profound isolation, the feeling of being meticulously cared for, yet completely unseen. The foundation of their perfect world was not built on a solid rock of understanding, but on a precarious layer of polished appearances, and it would take only one crack for everything to come crashing down. The shift in Aisha was subtle at first, a change noted by her small circle of friends at Maplewood Community College, rather than her parents. The girl who usually lingered at the edges of conversation, her nose in a book, began to seem more present. A new light appeared in her eyes, a secret smile playing on her lips during lectures. She was distracted in a happy way, her gaze often drifting to her phone, which she now kept face down on the table. When her friend Leah joked about a secret admirer, Aisha just blushed and looked away, confirming their suspicions. Over shared fries in the cafeteria a week later, she finally confessed. There was someone. His name was Rohan. She described him with a breathless warmth her friends had never heard before. He was 22, a freelance photographer with a passion for capturing the soul of forgotten places. He was, she whispered, from a different community, and her traditional father would never, ever approve. This, her friends understood completely. It was the oldest story in their world, a forbidden cross-cultural romance. They immediately became eager co-conspirators, covering for her during her library study sessions and her extra violin practice. Aisha shared pieces of him with them. She showed them texts that were poetic and intense. "You are the first clear day after a lifetime of rain." One read. Another said, "My world existed in black and white before your laugh added color." She showed them a single, slightly blurry photograph on her phone. A handsome young man with sharp cheekbones and dark, thoughtful eyes, sitting on a low wall somewhere urban, a camera slung around his neck. He was beautiful in an artistic, slightly dangerous way, the perfect antithesis to her structured, predictable life. The gifts began to appear. Aisha wore a delicate silver chain with a tiny pendant, a gift from Rohan for their 1-month anniversary. She brought a beautifully bound, rare collection of Urdu poetry to campus, saying he knew she loved the verses. When autumn turned chilly, she was seen with a soft, expensive cashmere scarf in a deep emerald green. Her friend swooned. This was real, tangible proof of a love that was careful and considerate. The secrecy only added to the romance. Aisha's stories of their meetings were brief, but vivid. A quick, hand-holding walk through the state park at dusk, a conversation in his car in a crowded mall parking lot where they shared a single milkshake, a visit to a hidden bookstore in the city where he pointed out his favorite authors. They never spoke on the phone, she explained, because his work took him to remote areas with poor service, and video calls were too risky. It was a whirlwind, text-based affair, which felt modern and thrilling. Her friends never pushed to meet him. They were too invested in the fairy tale. They saw how Aisha blossomed under this secret attention. Her shoulders straightened. She offered opinions in class. The ghost in the Thakur house was coming to life, animated by a love that existed just outside its walls. What her friends were witnessing, however, was not a rebirth, but the most convincing performance of Aisha's life. Every detail of Rohan, from the shade of his eyes to the model of his camera, was a brushstroke on a canvas only she could see. The texts were a solo duet. The gifts were purchased with a trembling hand, ordered online and intercepted from the porch before her parents came home. The photograph was a carefully cropped image of a model from a stock photo website. She was not keeping a secret. She was building a sanctuary, brick by imaginary brick, and her friends' believing smiles were the mortar that held it all together. Then the storm clouds gathered. The radiant, smiling Aisha her friends had grown accustomed to vanished, replaced by a pale, hollow-eyed version who jumped at sudden noises. Her texts to the group chat went from excited snippets about Rohan to single-word replies or silence. When they finally cornered her in a quiet study corral, the story she told them was so shocking it seemed ripped from a disturbing thriller. She confessed, her voice a raw whisper, that her father had found out. Vikram had discovered a text on her iPad, she said, and had flown into a terrifying, silent rage. But then, she claimed, something even more bizarre happened. Instead of forbidding her from seeing Rohan or punishing her, Vikram had, according to Aisha, undergone a strange and horrifying transformation. He confessed to her that he had known about Rohan for weeks, that he had, in fact, been monitoring their conversations, and in doing so, he claimed he had become fascinated by the man who captivated his daughter. Aisha, tears streaming silently down her face, told her horrified friends that her father had then made a monstrous proposal. He said he would allow the relationship to continue on one condition, that he would take over the Rohan persona. His reasoning, as she related, was twisted yet delivered with her father's typical cold logic. He wanted to understand her, to protect her from within the relationship, and to ensure the boy was worthy. He argued that he could be a better version of Rohan, more reliable, more financially stable, more deeply connected to her. The real Rohan, Vikram allegedly claimed, had been paid off and would never contact her again. The texts she now received, the ones that still felt so loving yet somehow off, were coming from her own father. The friend sat in stunned silence. The fairy tale had curdled into a psychological nightmare. They urged her to tell her mother, to go to the police, to get out of that house immediately. But Aisha shook her head, a terrifying resignation in her eyes. She said she was afraid of what Vikram would do if she exposed him. She also confessed a shameful, confused truth. Part of her was relieved the secret was out, and another, smaller part, was grateful her father wanted to be this close to her, even if the method was deranged. She felt a sickening pull between utter revulsion and a deep, ingrained need for his approval. The dynamic at home became a silent, chilling pantomime. At dinner, Vikram would ask about her day with his usual detached air, while Aisha would feel her phone vibrate in her pocket with a message from Rohan, a message she now knew her father was typing from his home office downstairs. The digital ghost he had usurped now haunted every corner of her life. Her friends watched helplessly as she deteriorated, caught in a trap none of them could fully comprehend. They became wary of their own messages, fearing Vikram was monitoring them too. The truth, however, was a mirror image of Aisha's story. Vikram Thakur was utterly oblivious to the existence of Rohan. He noticed only that his daughter seemed more anxious, less focused, and he responded with increased criticism about her slipping grades and distant attitude. The chilling narrative of paternal infiltration was not his doing, but hers, a desperate, fractured attempt by Aisha's mind to explain why the perfect fantasy she had built was starting to feel alien and out of her control. The father, in her story, was not Vikram, but a monstrous character she had created to house her own growing fear that the beautiful life she lived was beginning to consume her. The night it happened, Nandini was 200 miles away, presenting a paper on pediatric sleep disorders. The Thakur house on Willow Lane was a vessel of quiet tension. According to Aisha's first, frantic account to the 911 operator and later to detectives, a text from Rohan had arrived just before midnight. It was a plea. "Meet me in the garage. I can't do this anymore. We need to end it properly. Come now." Heart pounding, Aisha had crept down the stairs, past the dark living room, and into the cold, concrete space that smelled of gasoline and old wood. But it wasn't Rohan who waited. It was Vikram, standing under the harsh fluorescent light, still in his work clothes. She claimed he looked at her not as a father, but with the possessive anguish of a jilted lover. He confessed everything, she said, but not as a monitoring parent. He confessed, according to her, that he had not just taken over the role of Rohan, but had fallen in love with the version of himself he had created. He said he loved the way she talked to Rohan, the person she was with him, and he wanted to be that man for real. As he spoke, he stepped towards her, his arms outstretched not for a hug, but for an embrace of terrifying new context. In a blind panic, her mind shattering under the weight of the confession, Aisha said her hand brushed against the metal shelf. She felt the cold, sharp edge of the box cutter Vikram used for opening packages. What happened next was a blur of motion and a single, sickening sensation of resistance, followed by a warm rush. Vikram stumbled back, a look of profound shock on his face, not of a betrayed father, but of a man whose fictional romance had just met a violently real end. Aisha fled to the kitchen and called for help, her screams etching the story into the 911 recording. When police arrived, they found a scene that was both straightforward and deeply confusing. Vikram Thakur was not in the garage. He was slumped across the polished surface of his mahogany desk in his first-floor office, a pool of dark blood stark against the wood grain. The murder weapon was not a box cutter, but a heavy, ornate letter opener from his own desk set, a family heirloom. The single wound was deep and precise, entering just below the sternum and angling upwards, a strike that required significant force and deliberate aim. The scene showed no signs of the dramatic confrontation Aisha described. There was no overturned chair, no struggle. It appeared Vikram had been attacked while seated, perhaps while working, utterly unaware of any imminent threat. A single set of footprints, later matched to Aisha's socks, led from the hallway directly to the back of his chair and then away in a frantic pattern. The digital evidence gathered that night began to unravel her story immediately. The text summoning her to the garage did not exist on her phone or in any carrier records. The last message from Rohan had been sent 6 hours earlier, a simple "Good night, my love." The narrative of the midnight meeting, the confession in the garage, it was a complete fabrication, constructed in the moments between the stabbing and the 911 call. But why? If she had simply snapped and killed her controlling father, why craft such a bizarre, specific lie? The detectives now faced two competing truths: the clean, violent physical evidence of a planned attack in the office, and the convoluted, emotional saga of digital identities and stolen love that poured from the traumatized girl. One of these stories was a meticulously constructed fiction. The challenge was determining which one, and who the true author had been. The investigation pivoted from a crime of passion to a deep dive into the digital abyss. While Aisha was held in psychiatric observation, detectives tore into the electronic lives of the Thakur family. The story of Rohan was the obvious thread to pull. Digital forensic experts quickly confirmed Aisha's friends' testimonies about the texts and the gifts. The poetic messages that had charmed her friends were traced not to a mysterious boyfriend's phone, but to an encrypted messaging app on Vikram Thakur's home computer. The receipts for the silver chain, the poetry book, the cashmere scarf, all were found in his email, ordered with his credit card. To the police, this was a staggering find. It seemed to corroborate the most shocking part of Aisha's story, that her father had indeed created and controlled the Rohan persona. The portrait of Vikram Thakur began to darken from a strict patriarch to something far more sinister and calculating. The narrative of a father impersonating his daughter's suitor was monstrous, but it provided a powerful motive for Aisha's violent act. It was a story of ultimate betrayal and a desperate bid for freedom. The case seemed to be closing, but Lieutenant Cora Hayes, a veteran with a skepticism for stories that fit too neatly, kept digging. She requested a full forensic extraction of Aisha's personal laptop and phone, looking for anything her father might have missed. The findings were a seismic shock that turned the entire case inside out. While Vikram's computer showed the delivery of the Rohan fantasy, Aisha's devices revealed its origin. A year before the first Rohan text was ever sent, her search history was a chilling roadmap. There were queries for how to fake text conversations, creating a believable online boyfriend, and apps that generate fake phone numbers. Even more telling were the emotional searches. Father ignores me. Emotional neglect. How to make someone pay attention to you. She had visited stock photo websites, and experts matched the image of Rohan to a portfolio of a European model. The most damning evidence was found in a hidden folder on her laptop, a detailed, written character profile for Rohan Mehta, outlining his backstory, his interests, his speech patterns. It was a script. The timeline was now clear. Aisha, drowning in loneliness, had invented Rohan. She had used her father's credit card, which he'd given her for textbooks and emergencies, to buy the gifts for herself, mailing them to a friend's house initially. She had lived the fantasy so intensely that when the line between her fiction and reality began to blur, her mind constructed a new, more terrifying narrative to explain it. She hadn't killed her father for impersonating Rohan. She had, in her fractured state, possibly begun to believe her father was Rohan, that he had discovered her creation and physically embodied it to torment her. The confession she described was likely a horrific projection, a delusion born from a psyche that could no longer distinguish its own elaborate invention from the world. The real Vikram Thakur died knowing nothing of Rohan. He died simply because he was the focal point of his daughter's profound, unaddressed anguish and the collapsing architecture of her imaginary world. He was not the puppet master of the secret romance. He was its first and only casualty. The trial was not a spectacle of salacious detail, but a somber, clinical dissection of a broken mind. Aisha Thakur sat silently throughout, her eyes focused on a point somewhere in the middle distance, seeing a world only she could access. The prosecution's case, built on the clean physical evidence, the angle of the wound, the lack of defensive marks, the undisturbed crime scene, painted a picture of a cold, premeditated murder. They argued she had simply grown to hate her controlling father and saw his death as her only escape, concocting the wild Rohan story to manipulate the court. But the defense, armed with the devastating digital forensics and the testimonies of psychiatric experts, presented a different reality, a world not of calculation, but of disintegration. The star witness was Dr. Eris Thorne, a forensic psychiatrist. He explained not what Aisha had done, but why she could have come to believe it was necessary. He described a condition not unlike a self-induced folie à deux, where a person creates a separate personality so thoroughly, they eventually perceive anyone who challenges that reality as an imposter. Aisha, he testified, had not just lied about a boyfriend. She had, over months, constructed an entire alternate universe where she was loved and seen. When the strain of maintaining that fiction, the fear of discovery, the guilt of using her father's money, the crushing loneliness that persisted even within her fantasy, became too great, her psyche snapped. In her broken state, the kind, attentive Rohan she had invented could not be a fiction she herself made. He had to be a real entity that had been stolen from her, and the only person powerful enough in her life to steal something so fundamental was her father. Therefore, in her mind, Vikram became the thief of her only happiness. The attack in the office was not an act of patricide, but a desperate, delusional act of reclaiming her fabricated love from the man she believed had consumed it. The jury listened to the 911 call again, not as a performance, but as the raw audio of a psychotic break. Her cries of "he was Rohan" were not a lie, but a terrifying testament to her reality. When the verdict was read, not guilty by reason of insanity, there was no sense of victory in the courtroom, only a profound, hollow grief. Nandini Thakur had long since moved away, her life and career in Maplewood obliterated by a tragedy she could neither see coming nor comprehend. The house on Willow Lane sold quickly to a young family unfamiliar with its history. In Maplewood, the story ossified into a simpler, more palatable legend, the strange, secret romance that ended in bloodshed. But the truth was far more isolating. Aisha resides at the Oakwood Secure Psychiatric Facility. Her room is sparse. She does not speak of Rohan or of Vikram. In therapy, she draws intricate, beautiful buildings that are always missing a crucial structural element, a foundation, a load-bearing wall. She is, according to her doctors, beginning to understand that the romance was not real, but the loneliness that built it was. The tragedy of the Thakur family was not a forbidden love, but a profound failure of connection. Aisha did not stab her father over a secret boyfriend. She destroyed the only real figure in her life in a catastrophic attempt to protect the only love she had ever truly known, the ghost she herself had painstakingly and painfully brought to life. The final twist was that there was no villain in the classic sense, only the devastating collateral damage of a heart so starved for affection that it had to invent a person to provide it, and a mind that ultimately turned on the real world to defend its fragile, beautiful fiction.